So I wanted to do this, John and Sterling, because after I put up the band interview, which someone kindly sent me, I don't know who it was, but I suspect it might be someone close to Rick, because I've been trying to get one of those for a couple of years and no one seemed to have it. But in any case, after that arrived and I put it on the internet, people began to ask me what was wrong with it. Why did he take that down? It was such a good interview, so clear. Why would he take that down? And I thought if the three of us would discuss our recollections of that time a couple of years ago, I could edit that down to a few minutes and post that along with the video. How does that sound?
Sounds fine. Now you want to focus on Rick and why he took it down, or and kind of leave Tom and Bonnie in the background, or how do you want to?
No, the other way around. I mean, my interactions with Rick have always been good.
Okay.
I thought the conversation was pretty decent. He's not the greatest interviewer in the world, but you know, it was okay. I got to express myself and he had some interesting ideas. So the interview itself was good. And afterwards, he and I exchanged quite a few private messages, which were cordial. What happened is my name kept coming up on his Facebook group. And whenever it did, I would go over there and see what it was about. One day when that happened, I saw these Einstein quotes and I got in touch with Rick and said, these are bogus, Rick, you know, they shouldn't be there. And at first he put up a notice along with the quote saying some of these may not be authentic. And I told him I didn't think that was good enough. There was too much phony bullshit on that page, and would he take it down? And eventually he did. And then I don't really know how Bonnie and Tom got involved in this. Maybe you guys do.
At the time, I was having a Facebook discussion with Tom on him speaking about the unborn state. And we were going back and forth about the unborn. And my point, it was absolutely nothing. And so right in the middle of that, I get this attack coming in out of the blue, calling me a drunkard, and I'm going down there to kiss Robert's ass and set him up to be a guru and all this stuff. And it was just bizarre. It was just right out of the blue. And a couple of volleys back and forth, he really let go and then blocked me. It was bizarre. Just utterly bizarre.
Well, I think for me, it was the fact that I think it was Bonnie who first put up the Einstein quotes. And it was clear to me from the very beginning that they were not from Einstein, and none of them had any sourcing at all. No indication of what book they came from or what speech they came from or who quoted him in a newspaper, nothing. There was nothing. They just, and then the argument quickly became her contention that she could say that Einstein said them, and it didn't matter if he said them or not because she liked what they said, which to me was just so completely off the wall that I could not deal with it in a normal way. It just violated every kind of ethical kind of norm in quoting other people or in attributing quotes to people that you don't know.
That's when I got involved in it. I hadn't known that this thing had happened with John and Tom, but somehow I found out this was going on Tom's page, and I went over there, and Bonnie was already in an argument with both of you.
Yes, okay.
Right. When I got there, she claimed that, as you were saying, it really didn't matter if these quotes were false or not, because what they said was so inspiring. And I told her that she was full of shit, basically. But I did it politely.
I think you started out politely. That's correct.
I started out really politely, the same way that I did with Rick. You know, I think these aren't really Einstein quotes, but she was already committed. I mean, she had already said these quotes shouldn't be taken down because they're so inspiring. And they had nothing to do with Einstein. Most of them were opposite to anything Einstein ever would have said. I've got a couple of Einstein quotes here that I know to be real, which I looked for today, knowing that we were going to do this. I'll just read these two so that we know where Einstein was coming from. He says, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." And I love that. Here's this profoundly talented man who says, "I have no particular talent." So there's humility right off the bat. He says, a human being is a part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. So that's just a perfect non-dual statement. It can't really get any better than that. I mean, it's really beautiful. And then the other one, he says, "I am a determinist. As such, I do not believe in free will. But practically, I am nevertheless compelled to act as if freedom of the will existed. If I wish to live in a civilized community, I must act as if man is a responsible being." So that's just perfect. That's really the way I see it. And I don't blame Bonnie for being the way she is, or Tom being the way he is. I'm not angry at them. They can't help it. This is what Einstein's saying here. Their behavior is determined by everything that came before. I know they can't help it. But that doesn't mean that they should be allowed to distort the words of this great thinker and put words in his mouth, which is a kind of vandalism of wisdom. So that's what I objected to. And Bonnie then told me that I was saying these things just because I wanted to be right, and that I was a bully, and that I was arguing with her because I'm a misogynist, which is ridiculous. And that's when I told her to fuck off. And that's all I know about the whole. And a couple of days later, Rick took down the interview, and that's all she wrote. That's all I know. Tom insulted John terribly by, I mean, John has been an inspiration to me, and he had it flipped around where John was like some follower of mine who was intoxicated with Robert. And that's so, I mean, John and I are great friends. That is so far away from what our transactions are like. It's like a bad joke, just crazy. I'd like to get that guy and pummel him.
Well, I had quite a good series of conversations with Tom before this all blew up. And then when this thing happened with the Bonnie and the Einstein quotes, then I objected to it. And, you know, it was fine with me if she wanted to say these are real nice quotes, but that one point was unacceptable to me, that it didn't matter that he said them or not, because I like him. And so therefore I can just get away with it. I was going to put in maybe Attila the Hun said these things, or it was Pol Pot from Laos during the execution of half the civilian population. This was on a newspaper he put out. I mean, it was that kind of thing. It was so absurd to insist on that instead of just saying, okay, we made a mistake. I don't know where these quotes came from. I like them, but I withdraw the suggestion that they somehow were said by Einstein. I don't think that that would be impossible. I've made plenty of mistakes. I rarely attribute something that I'm not sure of, but I would, if I was called on it and I didn't have could not back up what I said with a source, then I would say, okay, I withdraw that attribution. That's simple. That's a normal, in a scholarly way, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what intelligent people do. That's the problem. These people have no real understanding. They know, and well, I'm speaking about Bonnie now. Tom's another case. Bonnie knows enough to know that Einstein was considered a genius, but she doesn't know enough to know what a genius is. And that's the problem. And so she just wants to use the reputation to put words in his mouth, which is vandalism. It's a terrible thing. This man was one of the great lights of the 20th century. No one should be putting words in his mouth. We should be, if we're interested, we should find out what he said and see what we can make of it. And I'm afraid that Bonnie doesn't know how to do that.
Well, it's an intellectual dishonesty, or as you said, vandalism. And to me, it's just, once it's pointed out, I can understand somebody. I often have a thing on Facebook where people repeat a particular thing. There's a thing that supposedly if you press a certain button on Facebook, you can clear all your old problems away and reconnect with your friends. And you have to do a couple little, and it's a complete bogus thing. And I see some people keep repeating this thing. So I say to the people, this is complete bogus. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't reestablish your connections. It doesn't clean your system or anything. And then I put a reference to Snopes' article or a similar article saying that this is a hoax that's been around. And most people just say, oh, thanks, Sterling. I didn't know about that. I fell for this. I appreciate you saying it. And that's the end. It's a way you normally do something. Just like if I'm teaching somebody photography or English or something, and I correct them and they say, oh, now I understand. Thank you. And then we go on, and vice versa, right?
That's not how it works in holy hierarchies.
Right. Or unholy hierarchies.
Secular domain, there's a sanity about that, but that's just not how it works in holy hierarchies.
Well, they certainly believe that they are quite holy. I just looked at Bonnie's thing again. She's a life coach. And I think she and Tom are both welcome. Tom seemed to think that he's some kind of a Hindu reincarnation of I don't know what, a great Hindu saint or something from what I gathered from him. But Bonnie seemed to be the one that really pushed everybody into the, and he kind of disappeared of that. Is that correct, Robert?
I don't really know because he blocked me. I have no idea what's going on with Tom. But I do know that he accused John of being a drunk and said that he had been a bouncer in a bar, and so he knew how to handle drunks. And that is such a cowardly statement. I mean, he's bragging about his physical prowess and he can like beat the shit out of you and throw you out of the bar. Meanwhile, he didn't even have the courage to enter into a real dialogue with me. He had to block me before I could say the next word. John sent me a copy of this resume of all his trainings. There's like 50 of them or something. There's not enough time in life to have all those. I mean, it's like he wrote down everything he ever did except bouncer in a bar. I should have put that in there too. The guy is really off the rails. That's all I can say.
there's a term they use to describe people's disposition. The yoga, those, and it's called tamasic. And Tom is very tamasic. And I've met him 3 times personally. 2 times we're in a local natural food store, and the 3rd time was a party that the person who rents him the house in Pittsburgh, where he's got his little scene called the Yoga Garden. She had a cocktail party, and I was there with Tom and Bonnie. So I've met both of them 3 times. They're dense. They're into the intellectual icing on the cake. It's the word games, and they're good at the word games, but the pre-verbal stuff is not there. In my perception, the subtle little things in a relationship that you notice, just the kind of fit there. Like just even recognizing me or looking you in the eye, or those, there's kind of an avoidance in their fellowship. And in my response, because they set up this thing that's kind of in our neighborhood, a village in our, less than an hour away. So I know a lot of people in that, and when they moved in town and set up camp, I saw them coming in to be positioning as the village guru, and have all these little things, and it's just in your face spiritual capitalism and positioning, and it's obvious what they're up to. They're not that different than Rick. Rick has never communicated with me. I've tried to reach out to him a couple of times, but he won't return or do anything because I'm kind of not in their world. But they're both in their heads about this stuff. It's no different than a Southern Baptist around here. You can't reason, there's no reasoning. There are all these beliefs in there, and they hang on to these beliefs and crawl up that ladder to they're above everybody. And then they refuse to be challenged like any of these guru characters. None of them like it. You can't have an honest conversation with them. You can't reason with a belief. They've got their air castles. I call them air castles. They build these worlds and afterworlds and states and all that, but it's not going to put food on a plate. And then they beg money for it. They all got the donate button up there. I noticed when I was reviewing that list of his accomplishments, he was there getting darshan from Adyashanti. I thought that was funny. But he's just stacking it up. He's seeking like you can't believe, but he's seeking with his mind. They're both seekers, hardcore seekers. They can't relieve a search. They're looking. They want camaraderie in the search itself. That's their idea of fellowship. It's like on the yellow brick road. Robert comes along. Robert's going to pull the curtain back to reveal the Wizard of Oz as an ordinary human being. That's powerful. That relieves the search. That's their whole game gone. I mean, their whole game gone. If they're really honest, and they get it pre-verbally. but they're hanging on to their beliefs and their status, position in their status in a whole hierarchy. I've met a lot of these guys. I've been backstage. My fate has been one. Well, this is just another little chapter in a book of backstage shit I've seen all my life. It smells the same. I mean, Muktananda was a cool guy. Had some good times with him and everything. But I didn't do Muktananda like Tom did Muktananda. He joined the Royal Order and went through that thing. I just happened to bump in and could get in and out, never paid anything or anything, didn't join anything, but I had a relationship with the guy. But Tom was one of those monks as part of the Sangha, and also he's kind of played that game, and he stacks up more and more and more, like the first one didn't work. And Muktananda, he was ordinary, he was a scoundrel. I mean, he came back to the flesh. Because the air castles weren't doing it for him. This is Muktananda.
I remember Muktananda. I met him in his early 70s, I guess, and knew people that were his disciples. And he got himself a pretty good game for an old guy with all these young chicks behind the scenes at his ashram, or whatever you want to call it, in Oakland. He was going through them night and day. That was his real trip, was that. And as far as I can tell with Rick, his real trip is that it's a career, and it's a money-making career. And if you look at his site, it's designed to collect. That's how he's earning a living. You know, I think there are other ways you can earn a living, but I really have problem with people who you suspect may or may not have had at one point some kind of a revelation. And then they end up just like Francis Lucille, who I think we pretty well took care of, getting into it, making a career out of it, and a way to make an excellently good living, to live high on the hog, pretending you have something to give to people that you don't even have yourself.
Tom, Bonnie, and Rick are 3 peas in a pod.
Yes, okay.
And there's no reasoning to be had, because they all have spiritual diplomas on the wall, all of them. And they see themselves as masters in their class of trade. They pass a plate with nothing on it and want you to put money in it.
Right, because it's commercial spirituality. I mean, that's basically all it is that they're selling a product that doesn't really exist.
That's how they make their living. And they're bluffing their way through it. And they probably believe what they believe, but now I've never met Rick personally, but Tom and Bonnie, they don't have that I don't know how to say it, but there's just a sense and subtleties and things. You're just being with somebody, you can feel somebody kind of thick and somebody who's kind of sharp. I can pretty quickly, but they're not that bright.
Well, that's the problem. That's what I saw in my dealings with Bonnie and with Tom. They're just not really very bright. They're kind of like into hippie shit. It's lasted all these years. They're like a couple of hippie dropouts or something. My experience with Rick was a bit different. I found him to be both bright and sincere, but just confused. I don't think he was lying. We had a pretty good interview, really, except he imagined that he knew some kind of path to enlightenment. And I kept telling him that there isn't any such path, that being awake has to do with being here right now, not you have a foot on a path and eventually, as long as there's an eventually involved, you're not going to see it, because you can only see it now. You can't see it in the future. It's now or never. And he didn't really like that message. And that's where we kind of disagreed in our interview. But even though Rick has now insulted me, he sent me a really nasty email the other day. I still have a bit of affection for him, mostly because he enabled me to put my first book before the public. And I gained a lot of readers as a result of that interview. And that was really helpful, because now the book's out there in the world and it doesn't really matter what Rick does or says about it. Taking down the interview hasn't changed anything, really.
I think the handwriting on the wall is that your body of work is disrupting all of that crust. And you're an outsider. You're not really part of the spiritual community as they
Not
see
at all. Not at all, John. And also, I'm like a babe in the woods.
Out in the wood, big world.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah.
I'm 77 years old, but I feel like a child. I mean, when I move around in these circles where everybody's on the make, I feel like this little boy or something, pointing to the emperor and saying he has no clothes. I mean, I'm like a child because my experience is authentic. It's not based on something I've heard or read or some guru says it. I don't even attempt to be disruptive. It doesn't occur to me to be disruptive. It's just a personal confession. I had a real awakening years and years ago, and I kept silent about it because it was embarrassing, really, to me to be so disconnected from ambition. Suddenly, I just didn't know what to do next. My art career went down in flames. You know, I couldn't make it, and then I went and got the PhD so I could practice my profession, and I did that for years without speaking away. And eventually it just kind of happened. I mean, Robert Hall was the first one to tell me, you know, you're awake, you should really be teaching this. And John, you also encouraged me at a certain point to speak, come out, and invited me to that gathering with all your friends. And, you know, I've got no skin in the game. I'm not making a living selling books. I mean, it's not like that. I'm just trying to be honest. I've only got a short time left to live. And I think this is the best use of my time. It's simple. It's not, I don't know why these people are so, well, I do know why, because as you say, they're on the make and I'm disrupting them. But I really wish that I'm not attempting to disrupt anything. It's not the objective. The only reason that I started calling out these gurus is because as long as people believed that Adyashanti or someone like that could awaken them, they weren't going to hear what I was saying. It was just like throwing salt on the ground or clearing the brush so that what I was saying could be heard. But nothing against those people, you know, Adyashanti's probably a nice guy. He seems to be.
Yeah, he probably makes a good living at it. Lucy, Lucille is an interesting character. When I think the problem comes to, the biggest problem with all of these guys is identification. If they identify with what they think they are, they're no longer fresh. They're no longer present. They're no longer open to that moment that's going on all the time right now. That is the real danger there. So you made 2 books. I don't know if you're going to make another 20 or 30 books, probably not. But you're not involved in selling the books or selling them to people or anything. You made them, you made your statement, you talk on these forums, it's fine. But you don't get the sense that it's not your profession in that way. You're a photographer and you live there and you're a retired guy, you're awakened, but you're not selling awakening. And that disturbs people who are part of a group of people who are just in it for the money or the fame or the power. Look at the guys that are making the money today that are out there promoting awakening as something that you can get. Like if you take a training, you'll get there. Nobody gets there. Sometimes it happens, but there's no guarantees. You see with someone like Lucille, the same people are there 20 years ago. This was with Ichazo that I studied with. In the very beginning, he had capacity to transmit things, but then at some point, he began to believe in his own egotistical structures that was all there was. And then whatever he had that was fresh, that was insightful, that experience, the original experience was gone. And he was just, and there are several hundred people who spend a lot of their life thinking that this system, the Eureka system, will someday enlighten the planet and change everything. But they're all living in a delusion of identification with the system instead of having seen enough to just be present in the moment and be their normal selves. That's what makes it, you can see it in your pictures. When the people look at you, when you're walking down the street, this old guy with his camera, they don't cringe from you, or they see, oh, look, there's a real person. That's what I see that way.
Oh, thank you. That's a great compliment. Being a real person is a great thing to be.
When I see the motif of the non-duality crowd, and I see branding, and I see that branding with a lot of contrivance in it. And that's the antithesis of what you would see with Robert as a real person. There's all this contrivance and all this posturing and all the stagecraft, all of the stage name, the stage script, the soundtrack, the visuals, all the branding things are coming together to create a follower, not meet an equal. It's designed for a customer, the branding. They've nailed people up like Robert in history for being honest about saying the emperor's got no clothes. It just happens. And so the news is not going to be welcome in these camps. And reasoning is not a path that's going to work. It's been my experience, whether it's a Southern Baptist or a TMer or any of these where they've got all up in their heads all these beliefs that are just programmed in there. They're not going to let them go. That's their pacifier. They don't want to look life in the face. they're dreaming of an air castle with gold streets and everything. They don't want to hear you're going to die.
Yeah, that's the big one that I encounter when I speak from the heart. People really don't want to hear that there's no way to become immortal by jumping through some hoop that someone holds out in front of you. It's like a joke. Everybody wants to go to heaven, but no one wants to die, like that old blues song. And it's a joke because as soon as you're willing to let it all go, you're awake. It's so simple. And then you have nothing to really worry about. You just live, and one day you're not around anymore. No big deal. Nothing much to lose. It's really like a joke.
I never could understand that. I could never quite grasp the idea that when you died, that you went with Jesus in heaven forever. Why so many people were so resistant to walking through that door to greet Jesus? They do everything to avoid dying, right? But since their whole belief structure was that if they died, it would be wondrous and glorious and eternal and forever, and nothing, no taxes, living on clouds, and fantastic. So why not get there quicker instead of doing everything you can, including laying in a hospital bed with tubes in you for 20 years to avoid the inevitable?
You know, Sterling, I wrote that in one of my books, that if those people were really sincere, when someone got the cancer diagnosis, the friends should celebrate and say, boy, you are so lucky. You'll be in heaven soon. The rest of us have to go to work tomorrow, and you've got cancer. You're really lucky. But you never hear, you'll never hear that one. You just will never hear that one. Oh God. You know, it's really a pleasure to have a sense of humor about all this. And that's what's missing. That's what's
without
missing.
A sense of humor.
In these spiritual circles, everything is so serious, and there's just this feeling that you have to accomplish this thing quickly, and there's nothing to accomplish. The same thing's going to happen to all of us. Exactly. You're here, one day you won't be here anymore, and that's
all we know, actually, right?
And it's profoundly benign. What's more benign than dreamless sleep or unconscious or under anesthesia? It's just totally benign. There's absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Absolutely nothing. Religions make you, it's like a protection racket. They scare you about afterlife, whether some bardo, you're going to be reincarnated as an untouchable, or Satan's going to poke you with his fork, and fear. So people become afraid. Religions make you afraid of death, and then come to protect you. They cut you and sell you a Band-Aid. And that's what Rick, Bonnie, and Tom are doing.
This is great. This is really great seeing both of you. I'm going to pretty much have to sign off. I'd like to leave this with another Einstein quote, the third Einstein quote. He said, two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And sometimes I'm not sure about the universe. Now, when I think about Bonnie in particular, that's such a good reminder. You know, another way this is sometimes said is, never argue with an idiot. She'll drag you down to her level and beat you with experience.
Yes.
Yes. The other one is never fight with a pig. The pig enjoys it and you end up full of shit.